The rain hammered against the cracked window of the abandoned cottage, where Ilara had made her pitiful shelter, each drop seeming to mock her with memories of the life she once had. 5 years she had endured as Marcus's mate. 5 years of whispered condemnations and pitying glances from pack members who saw her barrenness as a curse upon their bloodline. The rejection ceremony had been mercifully brief, Marcus's voice cold as winter stone as he severed their bond in front of the entire Silvercrest pack, his new chosen mate already swelling with the child Ilara could never give him. She pressed her palm against her flat stomach, feeling the familiar ache of emptiness that had defined her existence for so long, wondering if the moon goddess had truly forsaken her, or if she had simply been born broken. The summons came at dawn, delivered by royal guards whose silver armor gleamed with an authority that made her small exile seem even more pathetic. The Alpha King required her presence immediately. No explanation provided. No refusal permitted. Ilara's hands trembled as she gathered her few possessions, her mind racing through possibilities, none of them comforting. Cale Stormborn's reputation preceded him like the shadow of an executioner, a ruler who had lost 3 mates to childbirth complications, each death hardening him further, until compassion became a luxury his kingdom could no longer afford. Some whispered he was cursed, others that his bloodline carried a genetic flaw that killed any woman who tried to bear his children, but all agreed that approaching him meant walking into the den of a wounded predator who had long since stopped distinguishing between threat and innocent. The journey to the capital took 3 days, and with each mile Ilara felt the weight of curious stares from travelers who recognized the royal escort. By the time the obsidian towers of Shadowmere Castle pierced the horizon, she had constructed 1,000 scenarios for why the Alpha King would summon a disgraced Barren Omega, each more terrifying than the last. The throne room was vast and cold, its walls lined with portraits of Cale's ancestors, generation after generation of powerful alphas whose painted eyes seemed to judge her worthlessness. Kyle himself sat upon a throne carved from a single piece of midnight stone, his presence dominating the space with an intensity that made her wolf whimper and retreat to the furthest corner of her consciousness. His eyes were the color of storm clouds before lightning strikes, assessing her with a calculation that made her feel less like a person and more like a puzzle he intended to solve. Cale's voice cut through the silence, with the precision of a blade being drawn from its sheath. You are Ilara of the former Silvercrest pack, rejected for failure to produce offspring, cast out and forgotten by those who should have protected you. The Videntes have spoken of an Omega marked by the moon, one whose womb can carry the Stormborn line where others have failed, one who will save my bloodline from extinction. Every test, every search has led me to impossible conclusions, but the signs point to you, despite the obvious contradiction. You will submit to examination by my healers. You will provide truthful accounting of your history, and if you are found suitable, you will become my mate and bear my heirs. This is not a request. The clinical nature of his declaration struck her harder than outright cruelty would have, reducing her potential future to biological function and dynastic necessity. Ilara's voice emerged smaller than she intended, years of being told she was defective having stripped away the confidence she once possessed. Your Majesty, I believe there has been a mistake. I cannot give you what you seek. I am barren, proven so through 5 years of trying. My former mate chose another specifically because my body is incapable of bearing children. Whatever your Videntes have told you, they are wrong about me. Cale's expression didn't change, but something flickered in those storm cloud eyes, a fragment of emotion quickly suppressed. The healers will determine the truth, not your self-perception shaped by those who benefited from your diminishment. You will go with them now. The examination was thorough and humiliating. Ancient healers with knowing eyes, performing tests that made Ilara feel like livestock being evaluated for breeding potential. They drew her blood, studied the patterns of her inner energy, consulted texts older than the kingdom itself, their hushed conversations and medical terminology she couldn't fully understand. The head healer, a weathered woman named Morgana, whose silver hair spoke of centuries of accumulated wisdom, finally emerged with an expression that combined shock with righteous anger. She took Ilara's hands in her own and for the first time since her rejection, someone looked at her with something other than pity or dismissal. Child, you were never barren. Your body shows clear signs of sustained poisoning with moonsbane and barren root, herbs specifically designed to suppress fertility while leaving no obvious trace. Someone wanted you to believe you were defective, wanted to ensure you could never conceive. Your reproductive system is not only intact, but extraordinarily powerful. You carry markers of lunar heritage, ancient bloodlines thought extinct. You were not cast out for being barren, but for being too valuable to someone who needed you hidden. The revelation shattered through Alara like lightning through a dead tree, illuminating 5 years of suffering with the harsh light of deliberate cruelty. Marcus had known, his tender reassurances, that her worth extended beyond childbearing, nothing but lies to keep her compliant while he poisoned her nightly tea. The pack elders who proclaimed her cursed had likely orchestrated the entire deception, though she couldn't yet fathom why. Morgana's next words provided the missing piece, her voice gentle but unflinching in its delivery. Your lineage traces back to the Moonborn clan, healers and seers whose children strengthened any bloodline they joined. Such unions produced offspring of exceptional power, and in ancient times, rival packs would go to great lengths to prevent Moonborn Omegas from bonding with their enemies. I suspect your former pack discovered your heritage and chose suppression over allowing you to enhance another's bloodline, particularly one now as powerful as the Stormborn line. You were not defective, Alara. You were dangerous to their plans. If you're finding this story as intense as we are, go ahead and hit that like button, because this revelation is just the beginning of Alara's transformation. And make sure you're subscribed, because you won't want to miss what happens when she confronts the Alpha King with this truth. Kale received the healer's report in his private study, a room lined with maps and military strategies that spoke to a mind constantly calculating threats and advantages. Alara stood before his desk, no longer the trembling exile, but not yet confident enough to meet his gaze directly. When he finally spoke, his voice carried undertones she couldn't quite identify, something that might have been regret in a man who hadn't spent years burying his emotions beneath duty and survival. You were poisoned to prevent exactly what I intend, which confirms the Vidente's guidance more thoroughly than any test could. Your former pack will answer for their crimes, but that is a matter for later. The immediate concern is whether you consent to fulfill the role fate has apparently designed you for. I will not force you, despite my earlier declarations. Desperation made me speak as though you had no choice. But even kings must acknowledge that some things cannot be commanded. The offer of autonomy should have felt like kindness, but Alara had learned to recognize manipulation in all its forms, and she heard the unspoken pressure beneath his measured words. What choice do I truly have, Your Majesty? I am exiled, powerless, and apparently valuable only for my womb's ability to carry your heirs. If I refuse, I return to nothing, condemned to live as a pariah in a world that has already decided I am worthless. If I accept, I trade one form of objectification for another, becoming a vessel for your dynastic ambitions rather than a person with desires of my own. You offer me the illusion of choice while ensuring that only one option leads anywhere but suffering. Kale's jaw tightened, and for a moment she saw past the calculating sovereign to the man beneath, someone who had perhaps not expected to be confronted with the ethical implications of his proposal. You are not wrong, and I will not insult your intelligence by pretending otherwise. I need heirs to secure my kingdom's future, and you need protection and purpose. This can be a transaction, clinical and clear, or it can become something more if we allow it. I have forgotten how to offer more than duty and necessity, but I am not so far gone that I cannot recognize when someone deserves better than what I'm capable of providing. His unexpected honesty created a crack in the armor she had built around her heart, and Alara found herself responding with equal vulnerability. I spent 5 years believing I was broken, internalizing shame that was deliberately cultivated to control me. I will not enter another bond where my value is measured solely by my reproductive capacity, even if the terms are more honest this time. If we do this, I need your word that you will see me as more than a solution to your succession crisis, that you will allow me to heal from what was done to me before expecting me to create new life. The trauma of believing myself defective does not simply vanish because I now know the truth. Cale stood, moving around the desk to face her directly, and she noticed for the first time the exhaustion etched into his features, the burden of 3 dead mates weighing on him like physical scars. I give you my word, though I acknowledge my track record provides little reason for trust. We will proceed at whatever pace you require, and I will ensure you have resources, respect, and autonomy beyond what is typical for royal consorts. In return, I ask only your honesty and your eventual willingness to consider the possibility of heirs when and if you feel ready. Is this acceptable? The agreement was formalized that evening in a private ceremony witnessed only by Morgana and Kyle's most trusted advisor, a grizzled beta named Thomas, who looked at his king with concern barely concealed behind professional neutrality. The mating bond settled over Alara like a blanket of contradictions, simultaneously comforting and confining, connecting her to Cale's emotions in ways that revealed depths he kept hidden from everyone else. She felt his bone-deep exhaustion, his suffocating guilt over his previous mates' deaths, his desperate hope that she might succeed where others had failed, and beneath it all, a loneliness so profound it made her own isolation seem trivial by comparison. Cale clearly felt her emotions as well, because his expression shifted almost imperceptibly, something that might have been surprise or recognition flickering across his features before he reasserted control. The first weeks in Shadowmere Castle were a careful dance of boundaries and tentative exploration, Ilara learning the rhythms of court life while trying to understand the man she had bound herself to. Cale was unfailingly courteous, but emotionally distant, their interactions marked by formal politeness that felt more exhausting than hostility would have. She occupied a suite of rooms adjacent to his own, luxurious beyond anything she had experienced in Silvercrest, but somehow still feeling like a gilded cage. The other courtiers treated her with wary respect, clearly uncertain how to categorize a mate chosen for breeding potential rather than political alliance or passionate love. She caught whispers when she passed, speculation about how long she would last, how soon the Alpha King's curse would claim another victim, whether she was brave or foolish for accepting her role. The castle's existing Luna, Seraphina, proved to be the greatest immediate challenge to Alara's tenuous position. Kyle had taken her as his 4th chosen mate 6 months prior, not a true fated bond, but a political arrangement that secured alliance with the powerful Nightshade Pack. Seraphina was breathtaking in the way of predators, all calculated grace and sharp edges hidden beneath practiced charm, her amber eyes assessing Alara with barely concealed hostility during their first formal introduction. So you are the miracle Omega, who will succeed where I and others have apparently failed. How fortunate for you that the Videntes conveniently discovered your existence just when Kyle's desperation reached its peak. I wonder what other convenient revelations will emerge now that you've secured your position. Her words carried the subtle poison of courtly warfare, implications and insinuations designed to undermine without providing concrete accusations to defend against. Alara had learned during her exile that silence was sometimes the most powerful response, and she met Seraphina's attack with calm directness that clearly unsettled the other woman. I did not seek this position and have no illusions about why I was summoned. If my presence threatens you, perhaps you should examine why a disgraced exile inspires such insecurity in someone who supposedly holds the Luna's crown. The confrontation rippled through the court like a stone thrown into still water, establishing that Alara would not be an easy target for the political machinations that defined palace life. Cale heard about the exchange within hours, summoning her to his study with an expression that combined exasperation with reluctant approval. Seraphina is a valuable ally whose pack provides crucial military support. Antagonizing her serves no strategic purpose. Alara felt her own frustration rising to meet his criticism, months of suppressed emotion finding voice in sharp response. Then perhaps you should not have brought another woman into a situation guaranteed to create conflict. I will not apologize for defending myself against attacks, subtle or otherwise, nor will I pretend to be grateful for a position that reduces me to breeding stock while your political Luna undermines me at every opportunity. The argument revealed fractures in Kale's carefully constructed control, his voice rising to match hers for the first time since they met. You think I wanted this? You think I enjoy treating women as interchangeable solutions to my succession crisis? I have watched 3 mates die screaming, felt their agony through bonds I could not sever, buried children who never drew breath because my bloodline carries some curse or flaw that kills anyone who tries to continue it. I chose Serafina because I had accepted that I would never have true heirs, that the storm-born line would end with me. But then, the Videntes brought prophecies of you, and I allowed myself to hope again, despite knowing better. So forgive me if I am not skilled at balancing political necessity with the emotional complexities of having 2 mates, one chosen for alliance and one for the possibility of salvation. His raw admission hung in the air between them, stripping away pretense to reveal the wounded man beneath the sovereign's mask. Alara felt her anger transform into something more complicated, understanding mixing with her own pain to create a fragile bridge between their isolated suffering. I am sorry for what you have endured, truly, but your pain does not negate mine. I will not compete with Serafina for your affection or position, but I also will not allow her to make my life here unbearable out of fear that I might somehow supplant her. If we are to make this arrangement work, you need to establish clear boundaries that protect us both from the political warfare that seems to define this court. Kale's expression softened almost imperceptibly, exhaustion replacing anger as he nodded slowly. You are right, and I have been avoiding the conversation because it forces me to confront my own failures as a leader and mate. I will speak with Serafina and clarify expectations. In the meantime, I want you to know that despite how this began, I am grateful for your presence here, for your willingness to try despite having every reason to refuse. Comment below what you think Serafina's real agenda is, because there's so much more to her story than simple jealousy, and the truth is going to shake everything Alara thinks she understands about this kingdom. The tentative peace that followed was disrupted 3 weeks later, when Alara began experiencing vivid dreams that felt more like memories bleeding through from another consciousness. She saw herself through someone else's eyes, watched as Marcus carefully measured Moonsbane into her evening tea, heard conversations between Silvercrest's Alpha and a woman whose face remained frustratingly obscured, but whose voice carried the refined accent of noble breeding. The conspiracy against her had been extensive and deliberate, orchestrated by someone with resources and motivation beyond simple pack politics. When she mentioned the dreams to Morgana, the healer's expression turned grave, her voice dropping to a whisper despite the privacy of the healing chambers. Your lunar heritage is awakening now that the suppression herbs have fully cleared your system. The dreams are not imagination, but true memory, your mind recovering what was hidden through magical means. Someone paid considerable money and effort to ensure you remained unaware of what was being done to you, which suggests the conspiracy extends far beyond your former pack. Morgana's investigation uncovered a trail of payments from Shadowmere's royal treasury to Marcus's pack, authorized by someone with access to discretionary funds reserved for sensitive political operations. The revelation that the conspiracy originated from within Kale's own court sent shockwaves through Alara's tentative sense of security, transforming the castle from refuge into potential trap. She brought her findings to Kale late one evening, finding him alone in his study, maps and reports scattered across his desk in patterns that spoke of a mind seeking solutions to impossible problems. Someone in your inner circle has been working to prevent my discovery for years, possibly since before my first heat when my lunar heritage would have become apparent. They paid Marcus to poison me, to reject me, to ensure I remained hidden and powerless. The question is why, and more importantly, who benefits from preventing you from having heirs? Kale's reaction was immediate and fierce, his alpha authority filling the room like a physical force as he summoned Thomas and his head of security. The investigation that followed was swift and brutal. Financial records examined with ruthless thoroughness, servants questioned until contradictions emerged, magical tracking employed to trace the authorization signatures on the suspicious payments. The trail led inexorably to Serafina, who had been manipulating palace resources since her arrival, her marriage to Kale apparently part of a longer game that involved preventing his bloodline from continuing. When confronted with the evidence, she initially denied everything, her composed facade cracking to reveal calculation beneath. But as the proof mounted, she finally laughed, the sound bitter and sharp as broken glass. You think you've uncovered some grand conspiracy, but you understand nothing about what is truly at stake here. Serafina's confession unfolded like a tragedy written in blood and political necessity, her voice carrying the weight of someone who had sacrificed everything for beliefs that now seemed hollow. The Nightshade Pack has been bleeding resources for decades, weakened by conflicts with rogue factions and declining birth rates. My alpha father made an agreement with the old king, Kale's father, that my brother would marry into the Stormborn line, uniting our packs and securing our survival. But when Kale's sister died in childhood, and the political marriage became impossible, we were left with nothing but empty promises and mounting desperation. When I learned through our spies that a Moonborn Omega existed, I saw an opportunity to prevent Kale from producing heirs, to keep the succession crisis active until my father could negotiate a new agreement that would save our pack. I never intended for anyone to die, never wanted to cause suffering beyond what was necessary for our survival, but I was taught that pack comes before individual conscience, that leaders make terrible choices so their people do not have to. The revelation transformed the entire situation from simple villainy into the kind of moral complexity that defied easy judgment. Serafina neither innocent nor simply evil, but rather someone who had made devastating choices while believing she protected those she loved. Kale's rage was palpable through their bond, centuries of alpha authority demanding immediate execution for such betrayal. But Alara felt something unexpected rising in her chest, a strange empathy for someone who had been trapped between impossible loyalties. She spoke before fully understanding what she intended to say, her voice cutting through the tension with surprising authority. What she did was unforgivable, but execution solves nothing and creates martyrs that will destabilize the Nightshade Pack further. There has to be another way, something that addresses both justice and the underlying desperation that created this situation in the first place. Kyle turned to her with an expression that combined disbelief with something that might have been respect, clearly not having expected mercy from the woman who had suffered most from Serafina's machinations. You would advocate for clemency after what she did to you, after years of poisoning and conspiracy that nearly destroyed your life. Alara met his gaze steadily, drawing strength from reserves she had forgotten she possessed. I would advocate for wisdom over vengeance, for solutions that break cycles rather than perpetuate them. The Nightshade Pack's desperation is real, and killing Serafina does nothing to address the instability that will eventually threaten your kingdom regardless. But if we can find a way to secure their future, without compromising our own, we transform enemies into allies and prove that power can be exercised with compassion rather than just force. The discussion that followed stretched through the night, Thomas providing historical context on Nightshade Packs, declining resources while Morgana explained the magical implications of various solutions. By dawn, they had constructed a framework that would strip Serafina of her Luna title and mate bond, but spare her life, while simultaneously establishing a tributary relationship that would provide Nightshade Pack with economic support in exchange for military allegiance and cessation of all conspiracies against the crown. It was not perfect, and many would criticize it as too lenient, but it represented something revolutionary in its rejection of the endless cycle of betrayal and execution that had defined pack politics for generations. Serafina listened to the terms with an expression that cycled through shock, relief, and something that might have been shame. Her voice subdued when she finally spoke. You are offering me mercy I do not deserve, and help my pack has no right to expect. I do not understand why. Ilara answered before Kale could, her words coming from a place of hard-won, understanding about the nature of justice and healing, because I know what it is to be trapped by circumstances beyond my control, to make choices because the alternatives seemed worse, to carry shame for things that were done to me rather than by me. I will not let what you did define me as a victim, nor will I let my response to it define me as someone who chooses vengeance over wisdom. Your punishment is to live with your choices and to watch as the peace you nearly destroyed is built into something stronger than what existed before. That will be harder than dying would be, and more useful to everyone involved. The political ramifications of the decision rippled through the kingdom for weeks. Traditionalists outraged by the apparent weakness, while younger pack members saw it as evidence of a new kind of leadership emerging. Kyle found himself defending Alara's influence on his judgment, arguing in council meetings that strength included the wisdom to choose alternatives to violence when such options existed. The experience transformed their relationship in subtle but profound ways. Alara's compassion challenging his reflexive authoritarianism, while his strategic thinking helped her translate ideals into actionable policy. They began spending more time together beyond the formal requirements of their arrangement, sharing meals and conversations that gradually moved from careful politeness to genuine interest in each other's perspectives and experiences. Make sure you're subscribed, because Alara's journey from victim to leader is about to take an even more dramatic turn. And the question of whether she'll choose to have Kale's heir will challenge everything both of them thought they understood about love and duty. It was during one of these evening conversations that Kale finally spoke about his previous mates with something other than clinical detachment. His voice rough with long-suppressed grief. They were not just casualties of my bloodline's curse, but individuals with their own dreams and fears that I barely took time to know before they died. Lyanna wanted to establish schools throughout the kingdom, believed education was the key to reducing pack conflicts. Moira was researching agricultural techniques that could have ended food scarcity in the outer territories. Celeste wrote poetry that captured beauty in ways I never learned to see. I remember their deaths in excruciating detail, but barely remember their lives. And that failure haunts me more than any curse could. I do not want to repeat that pattern with you, reducing you to your potential function while missing the person you actually are. His vulnerability gave Alara permission to share her own buried pain, words spilling out that she had never spoken aloud to anyone. When Marcus rejected me, the worst part was not the public humiliation, but the private relief I felt beneath the shame. Our bond had become toxic long before the rejection ceremony, his subtle criticisms eroding my confidence until I believed myself worthless beyond my ability to produce children. When that ability seemingly vanished, I had nothing left to anchor my sense of self to, no purpose or value that existed independent of my reproductive capacity. Learning I was poisoned should have erased that insecurity. But the damage goes deeper than rational understanding can fix. I am terrified of becoming pregnant because some broken part of me still believes I will fail, that my body will betray me the way I was taught to expect. Kyle reached across the space between them, his hand finding hers with surprising gentleness, the mate bond pulsing with emotions he could not quite articulate. Then we will not rush toward that possibility until you have had time to reclaim your sense of self beyond what was stolen from you. I brought you here because I needed an heir, but I am discovering that I need your partnership and presence more than I need continuation of my bloodline. That is perhaps selfish in its own way, but it is the truth I am learning to acknowledge. They sat together in comfortable silence as moonlight painted patterns across the study floor, the beginning of something genuine taking root in soil that had seemed too poisoned for growth. The healing process was neither linear nor simple. Alara working with Morgana to address both the physical remnants of the poisoning and the psychological trauma that had been deliberately cultivated. She began training with the castle's warrior Omegas, rediscovering physical strength and capability that had been suppressed along with her fertility. She established a council specifically focused on Omega rights and welfare, using her position to advocate for legal protections against forced bonding and reproductive coercion. The work gave her purpose beyond her relationship with Kale, building an identity rooted in action rather than definition by others. Kale supported these endeavors with resources and political backing, learning to use his authority to enable rather than control, to protect rather than possess. Their romance developed in the spaces between duty and healing, moments of unexpected connection that gradually accumulated into something neither had anticipated. Kale teaching her to read military maps and showing her the strategic thinking that went into protecting the kingdom. his respect for her insights evident in how he incorporated her perspectives into actual policy. Alara sharing her knowledge of lunar magic as it awakened within her, the two of them discovering that their combined abilities created synergies that enhanced both, his alpha strength amplifying her healing gifts, while her lunar connection grounded his more volatile power. They began sleeping in the same bed, not out of obligation but comfort, finding that the mate bond functioned best when they allowed themselves to be vulnerable rather than maintaining careful emotional distance. 6 months after her arrival at Shadowmere, Alara finally felt ready to discuss the question of children, but her terms were different from what Kyle had originally demanded. If we do this, it cannot be because of prophecy or political necessity, but because we both genuinely want to create a family together. I need to know that you would love me the same way if I chose never to have children, that my value to you exists independent of my womb's capabilities, and I need time to prepare mentally and physically, to work with Morgana on ensuring that my body is truly healed and that I am emotionally ready for the vulnerability that pregnancy requires. Kyle's response came without hesitation, his storm cloud eyes clear and certain. I would love you if children were impossible, if the Videntes were wrong, if we spent the rest of our lives building this kingdom together without ever producing an heir. You have already saved my bloodline by teaching me that worth is not measured in dynastic continuation alone, but in the lives we touch and the changes we make while we are here. If we have children, it will be because we want them, not because fate or duty demands it. The decision to try for a child was celebrated quietly, just the two of them and Morgana, in the healing chambers, the healer performing rituals that honored both the practical and sacred aspects of conception. When Alara's pregnancy was confirmed 2 months later, the news spread through the kingdom with the force of a tidal wave, hope and anxiety, mingling as everyone remembered the 3 mates who had died attempting the same. But Alara's pregnancy progressed differently from the start, her lunar heritage apparently providing protections that previous mates had lacked, her body adapting to the powerful stormborn bloodline rather than being overwhelmed by it. Morgana monitored her constantly. Ancient texts consulted to understand the unique magical dynamics at play, but the healer's cautious optimism gradually transformed into genuine confidence that this pregnancy would succeed where others had failed. Kale was simultaneously protective and terrified, his previous traumas making it difficult for him to fully believe that this time would be different. Alara found herself comforting him through panic attacks when her pregnancy symptoms mirrored warning signs from his previous mates, holding him as he shook with fear that history would repeat itself despite all evidence to the contrary. Their roles had reversed in unexpected ways. Alara becoming the strong one who provided reassurance while Kale struggled with vulnerability he had spent years suppressing. The experience deepened their bond in ways that transcended the magical connection, proving that true partnership meant supporting each other through weakness, rather than maintaining facades of constant strength. The birth was attended by every healer in the kingdom. Magical and medical resources combined to ensure the safest possible delivery. When their daughter finally arrived, screaming with outrage at the indignity of being born, Kale wept openly for the first time since childhood, his carefully constructed control shattered by the overwhelming reality of holding his living child. She was perfect and terrifying, impossibly small, yet radiating power that made the air shimmer around her. The physical manifestation of 2 ancient bloodlines merging into something new. They named her Luna, both for the moon magic that flowed through her veins and as a subtle acknowledgement that true leadership required compassion as much as strength. Alara held her daughter and felt pieces of her broken self clicking back into place. Not because motherhood completed her, but because she had reclaimed the choice that had been stolen, transforming trauma into triumph through her own agency and courage. If this story moved you, hit that like button and share it with someone who needs to hear about Alara's journey from worthless to irreplaceable. And don't forget to subscribe, because we're just getting started with these supernatural romance stories that challenge everything you thought you knew about power, love, and destiny. The kingdom transformed under their combined leadership. Alara's Omega Council implementing reforms that protected vulnerable pack members, while Kyle's military strength ensured that compassion was not mistaken for weakness. They established the first Omega Sanctuary, a place where those fleeing abusive packs could find protection and resources to rebuild their lives. They reformed succession laws to value capability over birth order, ensuring that their daughter would inherit based on merit rather than gender. They negotiated treaties with neighboring territories that emphasized cooperation over domination, slowly building a network of alliances rooted in mutual benefit rather than fear. The work was exhausting and often frustrating, change coming in increments rather than revolutions. But together, they proved that power, exercised with wisdom, could transform systems that had seemed immutable. Marcus and the Silvercrest elders who had poisoned Alara were eventually brought to justice, not through execution, but through public acknowledgement of their crimes and mandatory service in the Omega Sanctuary they had tried to destroy through their conspiracy. Watching her former mate work alongside the people he had once considered beneath him, slowly learning empathy through forced proximity to their suffering, provided Alara with a satisfaction that simple revenge never could have achieved. She visited him once, not to gloat, but to demonstrate that she had built a life so far beyond what he had tried to confine her to that his existence barely registered in her consciousness anymore. His apology was inadequate and self-serving, but she accepted it with the same grace she had extended to Seraphina, understanding that forgiveness was something she did for herself, rather than for those who had wronged her. Luna grew into a child who embodied the best qualities of both parents. Her father's strategic mind combined with her mother's emotional intelligence, alpha authority tempered by omega compassion. She showed early signs of extraordinary power, able to heal injuries with a touch and command respect from adult wolves while still in childhood. But more importantly, she grew up in a kingdom where her worth was never reduced to her supernatural abilities or reproductive potential, where she saw her mother exercise power through wisdom and her father lead with strength that included admitting mistakes. She would inherit a better world than the one her parents had known, built on foundations they had fought to establish, and that legacy meant more than any bloodline continuity ever could. On Luna's 5th birthday, Kale and Alara stood together watching their daughter play with children from all pack backgrounds, noble and common mingling without the rigid hierarchies that had once defined pack society. Alara leaned into her mate's embrace, the bond between them no longer feeling like a chain, but rather a choice they renewed every day through actions rather than magical compulsion. Kale's voice was soft when he finally spoke, vulnerability no longer something he feared but rather something he offered as a gift. I was wrong about what I needed when I summoned you here. I thought I needed an heir to save my bloodline, someone whose womb could accomplish what others could not. But what I actually needed was you, specifically and irreplaceably you. The woman who taught me that strength without compassion is just another form of weakness, that leadership requires the courage to choose mercy when vengeance would be easier, that love is not about possession or duty, but about seeing and choosing each other every day, despite our flaws and fears. Alara turned to face him fully, her hand finding his cheek in a gesture that had become familiar through years of small intimacies. And I was wrong about what I needed when I accepted your summons. I thought I needed validation that I was not broken, proof that my worth extended beyond the lies I had been told about my defective body. But what I actually needed was the space and support to discover that my worth was never dependent on anyone else's judgment, that I could reclaim my power by choosing how to use it rather than waiting for permission or validation. You gave me that space, even when it conflicted with your own desperate needs. And that gift meant more than any crown or title ever could. They kissed as the setting sun painted the sky in shades of amber and gold, their daughter's laughter echoing across the courtyard. The future they had built together stretching out before them with all its imperfect, hard-won beauty. The epilogue to their story was not a fairy tale ending where all problems disappeared, but rather the beginning of a lifelong partnership built on mutual respect, continuous growth, and the understanding that love at its best is not about completing each other, but about supporting each other's journeys toward wholeness. They would face more challenges, more political crises, more moments where their different perspectives would clash and require compromise. But they would face those challenges together, no longer isolated in their respective traumas, but connected through bond and choice to someone who saw their worst qualities and loved them anyway, someone who celebrated their strengths without needing to minimize their weaknesses. And in the end, that partnership proved to be the true salvation of the Stormborn bloodline, not because it produced powerful heirs, but because it demonstrated that true strength comes from the courage to be vulnerable, to choose compassion over cruelty, to build rather than merely maintain, to love not, despite our brokenness, but through the patient work of healing together.